cultural singularity and the future of Web3. With Mike Prasad.
Had this thesis that I developed over the last few years around the nature of the web, what we're approaching what I'm calling cultural singularity, and also what this means for the future of Web3 beyond just the current market. And so, before we go into sort of the narrative here, I'm going to go into a quick question. I'm going to define what culture is. So, most people look at culture when it comes to marketing and when it comes to different stages of the internet and content as a very generalized idea, and they have very different definitions. And so I want to start with a specific definition, which is that culture exists when you have generic elements, things that could be found anywhere, but they come together in a very specific form to create specific meaning. And so what that means is that form must be distinctive, it must have specific meaning, and it must persist. It must exist for a period of time beyond just a moment. And so what I mean by that is, a simple example would be a plate of food. So if you have flour, you have meat, you have vegetables, that could be a pizza, that could be pasta, that could be dumplings, that could be soup. And each of those dishes have specific meaning. They represent distinct values and experiences. And so culture can exist, therefore, in food, in experiences, in books, in music, any format where these elements come together. And you see a lot in content, for example. So now I'm going to go, what is community? So again, community can be ambiguous. I want to define it. A community must have a known identity. It must have an identity within the group. There must be interaction and engagement. And you see that both in digital communities and in real communities. It must have a defined method of communication that can be used and reused to bind that community. And again, also must persist. And so a simple example will be your friends. You know who they are, you know what they do, and you know how to call them. That's your own and your individualistic community there. So then we'll get into what is identity, and I'm going to go fast because this is a dense talk that I'm trying to do in 10 minutes, so we'll see how this goes. In identity, who you are as a person, again, must be defined, must have cohesiveness, has to come together in a form that makes sense, it has to be visible, people have to interact with it, and have contrast to be able to recognize it, and it must persist in you and the person. And so now with these definitions, I want to go into how we're approaching a stage in the world that we've never had before in human history, where all of the basis for these things are changing, and therefore this affects every industry in the world. And I would propose that the solution to this is implementations of Web3 technologies. So traditionally, the basis of culture and identity has been basically where you've grown up. It's been physical based. Who you are as a person is based on the people around you, the schools you went to, the clothing and the items that you had, very physical based. So if you're called millennial age and older, most of who you are defined as today were things that you experienced growing up, and you interact with them, you made a decision if I like or don't like this thing, and you adopted it and built your own identity. Now, what we fast forward to now is a world where what creates identity is fundamentally different and changing and more rapid. So instead of going through, let's say, your formative years up to 20 years old and having interactions in person in a limited availability of content through your physical experience, now someone who is younger, as a teenager, has most of their experiences digitally. Most of their first experiences on new ideas and new culture, new content, new style, it happens on TikTok in moments. And so the amount of interaction, the amount of decisions you make of, oh, I see this thing, I like it or I don't like it, now occurs digitally at a much more rapid rate. And as a result, instead of seeing cultures and people and identity that are more uniform, where if you took a single audience and divided into individual groups, you would have a small amount. In an older generation and a younger generation, you have lots of individualistic identity. So lots of segmentation, sub-segmentation within that group. So historically, let's apply that now to commerce. This is a very dense slide, but historically you have a situation where all of our businesses operate that way as well. We solve problems that originated based on physical situations. Countries were defined by their borders. Cultures of those people were defined by how they survived or how they had to thrive or get through hardships from the terrain and the resources in their country. And that developed into traditions, diets, meals, ways of thinking. And so all of that type of very physical reaction-based ideologies dictated how businesses were built up until recently. And then we kind of see this idea of broadcast, where media took that and extended that idea. And we took that to then say, okay, well, broadcast media is good for scaling out audience, but it still drives back to a traditional business, a physical business, when I'm shipping products. And so you get into the Web 1 and Web 2. Web 1 and Web 2, just extend that even more. We optimize that. And so what that meant is that, what it meant is that in Web 1, we took content, brought it online, made this amazing way to distribute and create content. Anyone could create it through websites, but we monetized it based on essentially paying for it to persist, web hosting, and be found. And ultimately, that was based on this idea of we monetized it based on ads. So we said the entirety of the internet in Web 1 and 2 is only worth what it can drive in a commerce transaction. And that commerce transaction must be physical based. So all of Web 2 and social media is based on advertising. So we're taking a percentage of essentially a physical-based commerce transaction and saying we're going to value the entirety of the web based on how much it can drive a transaction and a percentage of that. And over the last 20 years, we've seen a massive amount of people competing for the same amount of money, and so we focus on this idea of accelerated consumerism, where it drives more transactions. But you have more people competing for the same amount of money. When we go into a recession, the amount of money goes away. And this poses a lot of problems in scaling, because we've basically maxed out the optimization of physical distribution through our supply chains and warehouses and distributors, and now broadcast media and now web media. And so when we went into Web 3, we took this idea of like content driving commerce, and we added this idea of community, kind of as a segue from Web 2. But the problem with this is that most of Web 3 capital in the market is still based on a speculative market. So again, instead of taking technology and saying, what can we do that's super unique, we said, well, let's go ahead and let's just monetize it based on an abstraction, based on real world value and conversion, not on something that's new and valuable to what we've created in this experience. And so most of the early Web3 market was based on speculative markets, which fundamentally means that utility is not there and it has to be found. So in 2020, we had a really unique set of scenarios that I would argue kills the traditional model of commerce and introduces a new behavior that allows Web3 and beyond to grow. And we had COVID, which simultaneously made the entire world value a non-physical experience. So now you can work through Zoom. You can work virtually, not for everybody, but for a lot of cases. So we validated that not only that physical wasn't a requirement for value. We can now work virtually and actually produce good things. It also meant that our first experiences weren't in the real world. We met people. We joined communities that were only online. Our first engagements for a lot of people became social and digital and not physical. So we removed the physical requirement, and we forced a sort of a valuing of that in a scenario where we didn't have that value. We also had IDFA and privacy laws, which changed retargeting, which was the optimization of an extension of a physical commerce-based sales channel. And then we had algorithms which took content, micro-content, anyone can now create with a phone, and made it persist, made it exist. And therefore, we're taking these elements of what a culture that builds communities and identity and making them completely virtual, unrestricted by physical requirements, and scaled at a rapid pace. And so we create all these new dynamics and behavior. And so when I'm predicting for what is Web3 going to evolve into is this idea of content, community, and commerce integrated together in a model where we're equally valuing not just the ability to drive a traditional commerce transaction, but the idea that commerce can be virtual, and there's value there, because we've had that behavioral change over the last 2 years. And also that there's equal value in the value of community and in the content itself. And you'll see that with a lot of monetization. You start seeing on subscription paid content. You're seeing that in the platforms. Now, what this means is that a lot of the traditional ways of affiliate marketing, a lot of the traditional ways of advertising is fundamentally changing, because Facebook and TikTok and all these networks are extending the value of a physical transaction and have not yet embraced the value of a digital transaction. Web3 mechanics support these type of adoptions. However, we've yet to find the utility that makes that type of value being created accessible and scalable to everybody. And that's the potential for Web3, I think what I call Web3 plus. Because we're taking these virtual experiences and we're doing things that can only accelerate only in a digital environment, and doing them rapidly in a way that then creates that value. And so what I'm going to define as I wrap up here, because our time's up, is, next slide. Need the next, there we go. Okay, so I'll say the future of Web3 is a creator-centric integration where content is driven by algorithms to create the right type of content and engagement for the right person at the right time. And TikTok is a perfect example of this, where community is owned. An owned community must have the same requirements as regular community, which is you must have the identity, you must know the activity, and you must have the content mechanism. And by that definition, Web 2, all these social media, it's not owned community. It is distribution on someone else's own community. So, you combine that with the idea of what I call community-generated business models to drive commerce in both digital and physical mechanisms. That creates a model that can surpass any previous type of commerce and can integrate with real-world commerce. And to do that, we need to be able to have the infrastructure, which we started seeing with protocols. We need to have the integrated environments we're starting to see with marketplaces, something like Nifty Gateway, for example, but something that's more robust for specific industries. And then at the end, we need to then see the value and the adoption and the interaction being created in these digital communities needs to translate back out into the real world. And so I call it digital and real interplay. And so with these mechanics and these layers that we've built and are building, I think this will be the future of the Web3 as it relates to transforming what I would argue is every industry in the world in a nature of behavior and a nature of commerce that we haven't really experienced yet as a human race. And so I think this creates a massive opportunity for companies to understand the mechanics, integrate them together, and I think every business must recognize the value between not just content to drive a traditional commerce transaction, but content to drive community and integrate all kinds of commerce. So, thank you. Mike Prasad, this is a very condensed version of my talk, but hit me up on WhatsApp or on social media, and I'll be on stage tomorrow presenting my platform, Live Recreator, which solves a lot of these problems.